Hey guys, today's topic is about realism. So, one of the most problematic terms in literary criticism is realism. The word, it is a word, came from, derived from Poetischer Realismus, which is a German phrase coined in 1802, which has been variously employed to describe an ontological philosophy, a theory of painting, a narrative style, a concerted cultural revolt against romanticism and idealism, a distinct literary period, and a quality of modern writing. When understood as a broad-based and persistent aesthetic movement, a concept which tends to subsume each of these definitions, realism becomes considerably clearly clarified in meaning. The first idea of realism as a purposive, self-conscious movement occurred in Europe around 1830, and the last significant ramblings around in 1914. So, realism starts from 1830 to 1914. Near the outbreak of World War I, the end of Edwardian age, and the meteoric rise of modernism. So realism ends with modernism. Although the distinct literary and social heritage of dozens of countries in which realism flourished led to marked difference in the literature produced, and each national movement championed several essentially identical principles. These like the beliefs in the changing of settings, characters, language, and events serve to unify the inspire the efforts of numerous original writers interested, and above all, in the advancement of the novel, the form which came to dominate the era. So realism was very important for novel, and it is used too much into novel. Although it may be well argued that the tradition of poetic and dramatic realism, as evident by the works of Homer, Euripides, Aeschylus, Christopher Marlowe, Shakespeare, Ben Jonson, has employed longer and rich tradition than novelistic realism. It was novel almost exclusively that excited the mind of those 19th-century writers on revolutionizing the role of the creative artist. Novelist, Novelistic realism, that realism which is used in novels, has its roots in the works often termed the first modern European novel of Miguel de Cervantes, which is a Spanish writer, and in his novel Don Quixote. The publication of Don Quixote marked one of the most important watershed in literary history, and this novel is it's against the imaginative literature and corresponds concerned with the various levels of human perception, hastened the demise of chivalric romance, and inaugurated the gradual ascendancy of true-to-life narration. So what's important in realism? The true-to-life narration, a thing which seems real in life. Such a situation is created novel is called realism. In the 18th century, Sir Cervantes' innovation were furthered, particularly in England, by such writers like Daniel Defoe, Henry Fielding, Tobias Smollett, Samuel Richardson. However, neoclassicism, with its emphasis on lofty sentiments and the emulation of Greek and Latin models of poetry and drama, tended to dominate serious literature. In the early 19th century, the precursors of realistic literature became more widespread. Accurate portraiture of society, particularly bourgeois and middle class, became commonplace following the pioneer working of Jane Austen in England, Stendhal in Stendhal and Balzac in France, Nikolai Gogol in Russia. In Germany, however, the advancements towards realism was slowed by the enormous influence of Romanticist Johann Wolfgang von Goethe and the tradition of the 19th century Bildungsroman, the novel of formation. Though this form and such important subtypes of Bildungsroman such as Roman, which is an artist novel, though its form and such importance and and they gradually became well suited to both realistic and modernistic novel writing. Notwithstanding the special situation in Germany, Romanticism with its emphasis upon lyric poetry, nature and the imagination and the sublimity of the individual began to systematically replaced by realism throughout Europe from about the mid-19th century onwards. As a recognized school of thought, however, realism first emerged in France through the painting techniques of Gustave Courbet. And there's another writer, Chamfrey, who is a minor novelist and critic, outlined the artistic principle of Courbet in Le Realism, which is translated as realism, while arguing writers to mimic Courbet's style of close detail observance. Gustave Flaubert, probably the first and single most influential writer in realistic vein, proceeded his work with a prolonged narrative experimentation. The completely unidealized objective presentation of a story of adultery, the novel that emerged as Madame Bovary in 1881. Flaubert's talent for subtle satire and his keen understanding of moral tragedy elevated both his novel and the genre as a whole to a station of unprecedented importance. With Flaubert's example of unobtrusive narration to guide the experiment of an international circle of admirers, namely the writers like Amélie Zola, Guy de Maupassant, Henry James, and many more like Giovanni Verga, the novel becomes the vehicle par excellence for documenting 18th century society. So in different places in Russia, in France, the America were among, and their novelists like Henry James, and that different writers in these places were among the novelists who almost notably emulated and expanded upon Flaubert's method. Greatly added to the novel's force with Flaubert's chief student, Guy de Maupassant, who became responsible for resurrecting and defining the story form, which is a powerful vehicle for realistic expressions, which are significantly furthered through the stylistic developments of such writers like Anton Chekhov and realistic modernist Ernest Hemingway, who is from the lost generation. So surprisingly, Flaubert eventually rejected his demanding method, almost as if to say that complete documentary objectivity was more an ideal than an attainable reality, more a hollow realist artistic invention than an ultimate creative end. Although such text-oriented disillusionment was atypical of the Romantic writers, a broad psychological and social disillusionment was not. Increasingly, the industrial age held sway over their minds, as did advancement in scientific knowledge. One of the most influential extra literary work was Charles Darwin's On the Origin of Species, which propounded the theory of evolution and indirectly shattered the long-standing religious assumptions about the creativity of this universe on this world and etc. The writings of Friedrich Nietzsche, Karl Marx, Soren Kierkegaard all added to the Darwinian assumption that humanity must rely on itself rather than some transcendent aids coming from God for the betterment of human condition. And so positivism and pragmatism became the watchwords of the Western intelligentsia. Populism and socialism, like for those of the working and the middle class. So, realism, despite it assure Flaubert root, and largely became during the 1880s and 1890s a venue for social criticism and satire commentary. So Emile Zola's Manifesto, the experimental novel, and his novel Germinal, Master and Man, played a central role in this development, in which the initial tenets of realisms were carried to such an extreme that a new movement, naturalism, was born. Writers in United States, a country which is a country that plunged to rapid growth through immigration and widespread problems of poor living condition and injustice in workplace, were particularly receptive to the clear-eyed humanitarian, if deterministic message of Emile Zola. So, foremost among this naturalistic group was Stephen Crane, Frank Norris, Theodore Dreiser, Jack London. Interestingly, their decidedly reactionary stance and techniques helped to legitimize and mainstream the work of their realistic counterparts like Henry James, Mark Twain, and William Dean Howells, who were once regarded and equally reactionary by the romantic mainstream. So, beyond the roots, highlights, and turning points of the two closely related movements, like I'm talking about the realism and naturalism, no less and more so than modernism or a number of diverse 20th century movements, including proletarian literature, magic realism, and new novels, stood for the development of literary form and techniques capable of supporting one particular generation's view of reality. The unreliable narrator, the local color sketch, the cultural irony, vernacular dialogue, the anti-hero. These were the tools used by a host of writers including George Eliot, Charles Dickens, Henry James, Gustav Flaubert, Fyodor Dostoevsky, Leo Tolstoy, Henry Ibsen, August Strindberg, like many other writers like George Gessing, Emily Pedro Bazan, Emily Scarram, Premchand, and they embarked on their investigation of the unconscious mind and the rise of religious skepticism and changing class structure and cultural mores. Undoubtedly, the realists were the first to so deliberately schematize and popularize true-to-life narration, in which indisputable classics like Madame Bovary, War and Peace, The Portrait of a Lady, or Mutual Friend, Brother Karamazov, Middlemarch, and an American tragedy, yet they were no means the last. Modernists Thomas Mann, Marcel Proust, Henry James Joyce, the three preeminent novelists of the 20th century, each drew upon the tradition of realism in order to create something at once artistically new, independent, yet inescapably rooted in the literary past. So, so, um, a new novelist, Helene Robbie Grillet, he writes, realism is the ideology which each brandishes against his neighbor, the quality which each believes he possesses for himself alone. And it has always been the same out of concern of realism. Each new literary school has sought to destroy the one which preceded it. Since, and ending the video on this note still, that remains unique of the realistic movement as a whole in the sheer enormity in terms of works, names, and a nation it encompassed. The epoch of realism, one unprecedented in daring, scope, achievement, ushered in the 20th century and the beginning of the modern literature as no other could. So that was all. I have also made a video on the there is a literary theory by Samuel Johnson on novels and realism in it. So make sure that you watch that video. It's a very interesting video, and I will 100% want you to watch that video. And I have also made 2 videos on Bildungsroman, Künstler romans. Link will be given in the description below. You can watch that videos from there. Thank you.